Hey everyone, this is Mrs. Mallard here, and this is Unit 1, Lesson 3, Part 1 on connective tissues. So connective tissues, what I've done is I've divided this lesson into two parts. So instead of being one long continuous lesson, we're just going to break it down into two smaller parts. So just as a quick review, these are the four major types of tissues. We've already gone over epithelial tissues. And so now we're on to our second category called connective tissue. And the key word that goes with connective tissue is supports. These are tissues in the body that are going to provide support in different ways. So that's kind of the one word that summarizes the job of connective tissues. Now, there are lots of different connective tissues that we're going to go over. We've got four big categories, so that's why we're kind of splitting this up into two parts. The part we're going to focus on today is what's referred to as connective tissue proper. So we're going to focus on that today. So we're going to go over loose versus dense connective tissue. The second part of this lesson, we're going to talk about cartilage, bone, and blood. So connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood, those are kind of our four subcategories of connective tissue. Today, we're just going to focus on loose versus dense connective tissue. And as we've been doing, we're going to be able to identify what these tissues look like underneath the microscope. So that's your first goal, is to be able to identify the tissue. And the second goal is to be able to identify where at in the body these tissues are located. So first, like I said, today we're going to go over loose versus dense, and just based on those names, if you see the word loose, you know that things are not going to be packed in this particular tissue versus dense. If you think of the word dense, you have a lot packed into a small area or space. So kind of keep that in mind as we talk about the differences between loose and dense connective tissue. All right, the first example of a loose connective tissue we're going to talk about is areolar. So areolar, let's take a look at it, what it looks like underneath the microscope. It looks like it has all these fibers. Some of them are stained purple, some of them are stained hot pink. But if you notice, it kind of looks like a cobweb, and there's a lot of space in between all of those fibers. And so this particular tissue is the tissue that is going to cover organs. The epithelial tissues that we talked about before, all of those epithelial tissues are actually going to kind of sit on this tissue. It actually, areolar supports epithelial tissue. And the other thing to notice is because it has all this space, areolar tissue is basically a reservoir for water. So nutrients and water that's going in and out of the cells of different organs, they're going to be kind of coming through this areolar tissue. All right. So this is kind of a good way to remember its function, because if you look at the structure, there's some fibers, but there's a lot of space. And so that space is used to store water. Another way, just to kind of summarize areolar, is that it's the cushion and the glue for the organs. All right, it's going to wrap the organs, and it's going to kind of keep the organs in place where they need to be, and where they need to be kind of stuck at in the body. So that's loose connective tissue. That is our first example of areolar. Our second example of a loose connective tissue is adipose. And once again, if you notice, there's just a lot of space in between here. And adipose tissue is basically fat cells. So these are going to have fat droplets inside of them. So this white space that you see, it looks like there's nothing in there, but actually that's a big giant fat droplet that's in there. So it kind of looks like chicken wire almost. It kind of looks like chicken wire, lots of spaces. In that space is a giant fat droplet. The droplet takes up so much space inside of the cell that the nucleus, if you look at this picture, the nucleus basically is shoved up against the side of the cell membrane because that fat droplet is taking up so much space. So if you remember from biology, fat is going to be used to insulate, all right, to insulate, so kind of help keep heat in. We have fat to protect organs, so especially like around your kidneys, you have fat to protect that. And also, if you don't have anything to eat, your body can tap into this fat reserves in order to fuel your body. So fat kind of serves a lot of different purposes in our body. So loose connective tissue, this is adipose, which is basically made up of fat cells. All right, so areolar and adipose are our two loose connective tissues. Now we're going to talk about our two dense. So if you think of the word dense, all right, if something is dense, that means we have a lot of whatever it is packed into a given volume. All right, so kind of keep that in mind when we look at the pictures of dense connective tissue. All right, so this is our first type of dense connective tissue. It's just simply called dense regular. And the reason why it's called regular is it's made up of these collagen fibers. And if you notice, the fibers all run in the same direction. So if you look at this picture here, it kind of looks like wavy lines. But if you notice, all of the lines here are going in the same direction. And so what this allows is it allows for great tensile strength. So tensile means that if I had a string and I pulled it from both ends, so it's getting pulled from both ends, that string can withstand being pulled from both ends. Okay, so ligaments and tendons are going to be made up of dense, regular connective tissue. So ligaments and tendons have to be able to basically kind of be pulled, have to be able to be pulled, all right? And if you don't know the difference between a ligament and a tendon, so a ligament is going to connect bone to another bone. So you might have heard, probably the most famous ligament people know of is like ACL. Like you hear of a football player, oh, they tore their ACL. So the ACL is a ligament in your knee. It connects bone to bone. The other type of dense regular tissue is tendon. Tendon does connect to bone, but it's not bone to bone. It's going to connect a bone to a muscle. Okay, so it's going to connect the muscle to a bone. And both of those are made up of dense regular. Now, here's the other thing. It says that this tissue is poorly vascularized. That term vascularized means if you have a vascularized tissue, it means that's a tissue that gets good blood flow. It has a good supply of blood that flows to that tissue. All right, now, but here it says it's poorly vascularized, which means this is a tissue that's not really going to get a whole lot of supply of blood or blood flow. That is very important because tissues that are poorly vascularized take a lot longer to heal. Okay, so if you know of anyone who has torn a ligament, you're looking at anywhere from 6 to 8 months for recovery time. And the reason why that is because this tissue does not get isn't vascularized, and it's poorly vascularized. So it takes so much longer for any damage to a ligament or a tendon to heal because of that. All right. This is dense regular, your ligaments and your tendons. The other one is dense irregular. All right, and you can see by the picture why it's called dense irregular, because if you notice, instead of all the lines going in a nice straight line, it's like all over the place. So that's why it's called irregular, because the fibers go in multiple directions. This is helpful if you have a part of the body that has to be pulled in different directions. So you have parts that have to withstand tension, whether it's being pulled from side to side, up and down, all of that. Okay, multiple directions. So probably the one that you would be most familiar with is the dermis of the skin. So this is the dermis is found is like the second layer, not the top layer, but the layer below that. And so your skin has to be able to get pulled in not just one direction, but it has to be able to be pulled in multiple directions. So the fibers running in all multiple directions are going to allow that to happen. Okay. So just to kind of recap our lesson here, we talked about, we started talking about connective tissue. We have loose connective tissue. Our two examples are areolar and adipose. And the other type of connective tissue proper is dense. And we have dense regular and we have dense irregular. All right, so that concludes part one of our connective tissues. And in the second part, we're going to be learning about cartilage, bone, and blood.